This lesson is on using or finding trig ratios from a point on the unit circle. So this says, suppose that an angle theta is in standard position whose terminal side intersects the unit circle at 2 square root of 6 over 7, 5, 7. So we're just going to go ahead and plot that point. I know that it is in the first quadrant because both of these are positive. So this is the ordered pair 2 square root of 6 over 7 and 5 over 7. So I'm going to go ahead and draw this triangle here to help us out. This is theta. So x is 2 square root of 6 over 7 and y is 5 over 7. So it's asking us to solve for the exact values, again exact means no calculator, of cosine theta, tangent theta, and secant theta. So we need to know the hypotenuse before we can answer this question. So I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem to figure out the hypotenuse. So c squared equals 2 square root of 6 over 7 squared plus 5 over 7 squared. 2 square root of 6 squared is equal to 6 times 4, which is 24, because that's square root of 6 times square root of 6, which is 6, times 2 squared, which is 4, divided by 7 squared, which is 49. 5 squared is 25 over 7 squared, which is 49. And that gives us 25 plus 24, which is 49. So that gives us 49 over 49, which is 1. And the square root of 1 is 1. So we can solve for each of these now. Cosine, remember, is adjacent over hypotenuse. Tangent is opposite over adjacent. And secant is 1 over cosine, which is hypotenuse over adjacent. So the cosine of theta is equal to adjacent, so 2 square root of 6 over 7 over hypotenuse, so over 1. So there's cosine. Sine is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, so 5/7 divided by 1. And secant is equal to hypotenuse over adjacent. So secant of theta is equal to hypotenuse 1 over adjacent, 2 square root of 6 over 7. So remember, when we divide by a fraction, we multiply by its reciprocal. So that's equivalent to 7 over 2 square root of 6, which I'm going to go ahead and rationalize the denominator. So I'm going to multiply both numerator and denominator by square root of 6. And that gives us 7 square root of 6 over 2 times square root of 6 times square root of 6, which is 12. And when we solved this Pythagorean theorem, we expected this to be 1 because it tells us that we are on the unit circle. If we were not on the unit circle, you could still solve these problems using exactly the same method. This value just wouldn't come out to 1. Let's go ahead and do one more example. So we're going to do question 3 here. Suppose that angle theta is in standard position and intersects the unit circle at 1161 and negative 6061. So that means we are in the 4th quadrant. I'm going to draw my angle in the 4th quadrant. So this ordered pair is 11 over 61 and negative 60 over 61. So here's our value of theta. So our x value here, x coordinate, is 11 over 61, so that's that distance. And this distance is 60 over 61. So again, we're going to solve for that hypotenuse, which we know, since it tells us that we are on the unit circle, that it is 1. But if we needed to solve that for some other circle that we were dealing with, we would take 11 over 61 squared plus 60 over 61 squared and solve that. Okay, so cotangent of theta, that is 1 over tangent, or adjacent over opposite. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. And cosecant is 1 over sine, which is hypotenuse over opposite. Oops, I went up to the wrong one, but that's okay. Adjacent over opposite. Secant is 1 over cosine, so hypotenuse over adjacent, and sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So, first thing you want to look at, are we dealing with positives or negatives? Because we are now in a quadrant other than the first quadrant. So in the fourth quadrant, only cosine is positive. So we know that all of our answers here, or actually cotangent is going to be negative. Secant is 1 over cosine, so that'll be positive, but we know sine will also be negative. So cotangent, adjacent over opposite. So 11 over 61 divided by 60 over 61, so I'm going to flip and multiply. That reduces to 1, so we get negative 11 over 60. Secant, hypotenuse over adjacent, so 1 over, so 1 divided by 11 over 61. So we're going to flip and multiply, so that's equal to 61 over 11. And sine, opposite over hypotenuse, negative 60 over 61.